Okay guys, so today I'm going to take you through my Boureka recipe from scratch. I think the overall macro note is that I like to use sunflower oil since it is really a flavorless oil and it takes in the flavor of the other ingredients that you're going to use. And since I like my dough to have a buttery flavor, I'm going to use sunflower oil, butter, and water. So basically, you can use salted butter, and if you're using salted butter, you'll just add a little less salt to the overall recipe for the dough. And if you use unsalted butter, you'll have to add a little bit more. You want your dough to actually have flavor, not be flavorless. So in the bowl, I have 2 half cups of melted butter to give you 1 cup of melted butter. I'm going to add 1 cup of sunflower oil, and then I'm going to add 1 1/3 cup of water, just slightly more water than the equal parts of sunflower oil and butter. This recipe can be thought of as being doubled, being cut in half, but basically, as long as you're using pretty much equal parts of the 3 ingredients with a slight lean into a little bit more water, then you can pretty much do any size of this recipe that you need. So just put all of those 3 ingredients together and stir them accordingly. So once I've measured out my flour, I'm going to pour it into the softened butter, oil, and water mixture and stir. You're going to be adding some flour once we see the consistency, and I'll show you what we need to end up with. So for the moment, I've added about 5½ cups of flour. And what you want to be careful of is that you actually don't overmix because as you mix flour, it can change consistency. So whenever we're making dough, we don't want to stir too much. You want to stir it till it's all in, but you don't want to over stir or over knead for this recipe or over blend. Anyway, so if you can see, it's pretty sticky and it needs a little bit more flour, and this is 5½ cups. I usually use about 6 cups for this recipe. Having said that, it really just varies on the day and the weather and the flour that you're using. So I'll show you where we need to land. So today's recipe, I needed, once you get to the 5½ cup mark, you want to slowly add another ½ cup, till you can see where you're at. I pretty much added about 6½ cups of flour today. And again, every day is every time I make it's a little different, and also I'll make larger size recipes and sometimes I'll just make smaller. But you do need to be able to make a ball with it and feel like you're going to be able to make little balls and roll them out. So that's feeling pretty good. One of the other things I don't know if I said before is that in the flour, if you're using salted butter, you're going to add about 1/8 teaspoon per cup of flour to your flour recipe before you mix it in here. If you use unsalted butter, then you'd probably use about 1/4 teaspoon per cup of flour. Okay. So I'm going to just keep playing around with this, and once I get it to where I want it to be, I might add a tiny bit more flour to this. I'm going to put it in the refrigerator for about 1/2 hour while I start to work on the cheese mixture. Okay, so regarding the cheese that goes into the Bourekas, I like to use fresh cheese from a gourmet place, not something that's like been in a regular refrigerator, refrigerated section, but somewhere that they make kind of specialty cheeses. Each week they get fresh. And my go-tos are French feta, Bulgarian crumbled feta, and these are all crumbled, and Greek feta. I use all 3 of those feta. I also then add goat cheese. I like the kind that comes more like cream cheese, but they also sell crumbled versions of it, which you can use. And then the last is I mix ricotta into it. So basically, these containers are about, actually, let's look. These containers are about like 3/4 pound, somewhere usually between like 0.69 pounds and 0.85 pounds. So it just depends on the container. And I don't measure the cheese. I just use these containers and I mix it all together with probably for each one of these, for what I'm gonna do today, I'll probably add 4 to 5 eggs to this mixture. So you are gonna wanna get in with a glove and really make sure that the cheese is super blended together. I'm gonna then add my eggs and also use my hand with a glove to really mix it all together. And this is gonna be the base of your cheese mixture. We're gonna then add the spinach, and for those, we're gonna just use the basic cheese mixture. And when I do just cheese Bourekas, I'm gonna add a little bit more ricotta and maybe one more egg. So the next thing we're gonna do is get the spinach ready. So what I use is one small onion, or one larger onion for 2 packs, or one small onion for each pack of spinach that I'm gonna use. I just find it's easier to use frozen organic spinach, but you could always use fresh if you wanted. You just need to chop it up really well. And the key with the onions is not to actually caramelize them. You just wanna cut them into very small pieces and just cook them, but you don't want to caramelize them because that'll change the flavor of the Boureka to sweet. And I'm not looking for a sweet spinach Boureka, just a nice and flavorful one. So you're gonna dice your onions, and I'm going to, again, cook them in sunflower oil so that the onions are just not picking up any other flavors. And I also don't want to caramelize my onions because that will give that, it will make things too sweet. I'm just looking to cook them till basically right about here. And then I'm going to add my spinach to this. You are not adding any salt or seasonings because your cheese is everything that you want, is all you want things to taste like. So there's no salt added to the spinach onion mixture that I'm about to make. And again, you don't want to caramelize your onions. So I'm going to add the spinach now. The goal when I'm cooking the spinach is really just, I'm just looking to make it, heat it up, warm it, get the onion mixture in there. And basically once it's, I'm not looking to caramelize this in any way, shape, or form either. Just cooking it for a few minutes till it's cooked. And then actually I am going to put this in the refrigerator because I don't want to put a hot mixture in with my cheese. Everything needs to be cold. That's going to get mixed together with the cheese. I'm going to let this cook just for a few minutes, and then I'm going to put it in a bowl. You could put it in the freezer even if you were in a rush, to put it, for 10 or 15 minutes to just make sure it's cooled down, or put it in the refrigerator for a half hour. I'm going to take almost half and half, but maybe a little bit more cheese. And I'm going to mix this together. Again, this is after both have been in the refrigerator or freezer for a little while. You need your cheese to not be runny. And we're just going to mix this together. And depending on what it looks like, I might add some more spinach. And sometimes I add more cheese. So once it's done, I'll circle back. So this is sort of basically what you want it to look like. I did add a little more spinach. It was just too much cheese, not enough spinach. And this is basically where you want to land. Again, I don't measure things, so you're just going to have to feel it out. So as I said, now I can make balls that are going to be easy for me to turn into, and again, this is at least refrigerated for about an hour. Just grab some dough and easily make balls that you'll be able to roll out into circles and make your Bourekas. You can obviously make larger or smaller Bourekas, right? So it just depends on the size that you want to use. I'm going to, for this demonstration, that's about 1.5 inches in diameter, and I'm going to use that for, so I just take the dough ball with my hand, I just kind of evenly spread it out. Depending on how pretty you want to make them or not, you can find a circular thing and, you know, make yourself a perfect circle, take the excess dough away. But if you want them just looking super homemade, you can also just skip this part. Additionally, like, one of the things that I think about is the dough needs to be thick enough so that when I put the cheese mixture in, that I can sort of stretch the top out and over without breaking. So you're not looking for this to be too thin because you're still going to be manipulating it once you put in your mixture. And again, once your mixture is cold, you put it in the freezer for an hour or at least the fridge for a while. It needs to be cold so that it's not runny, so that when you put it in, it's formed and it isn't leaking everywhere. So I don't have anybody helping me right now, so I can't videotape the flipping over of the dough, but I'm sure you guys will figure it out. And then I will just take a fork and kind of, you know, bind it together and make it look pretty. And that is the at-home dough Boureka. And then sometimes, like if I'm making a whole bunch, sometimes I will put a piece of spinach on top so that I know which ones are spinach and which ones are cheese, so there's no mistake. And then once I put these all on a baking sheet, I like to use the silicone baking sheets. You're gonna brush this with, I usually take like 1 egg with an extra yolk. It depends on obviously how many you're making, and you're gonna brush the top of these with egg yolk or a scrambled egg with some extra yolk. And then we'll get to putting them in the oven shortly. So I like to use a silicone baking sheet, and then this is 2 yolks with 1 full egg with 1 extra yolk. And we're going to just take a brush and just lightly egg brush the top of each of these. And then we're gonna put them in the oven. So now we're going to move on to the Bourekas with the fila dough. When working with fila dough, you have to kind of make sure that it doesn't dry out. So keep a very, very, very lightly damp cloth on top of it while you pull the sheets out that you're going to use. And it needs to be, there needs to be some kind of a fat added to it so that so it'll puff up and not just be dry flakes. So I'm going to use for 1 layer, again, sunflower oil, because I'll probably use 2 sheets. It depends on the fila dough that's available and how big it is and all that kind of stuff. So I'll show you once we get to that. But bottom line is I'm going to take, let's say, 1/2 cup equal parts of sunflower oil, equal parts butter. But if I were going to lean in any direction, I would do a little bit more sunflower oil here than butter. And I'm going to melt the butter and add the sunflower oil and use that with a brush to brush onto the fila dough on the second layer. And on the first layer, I'm going to spray the organic sunflower oil because it saves a little bit of time. And I'll hopefully be able to take you through that. Okay. Sheet and fold it over like that. So far that's been 3 folds, and at this point I am going to add a little bit of the butter mixture so that we don't get dried out. Fold.